It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the Missouri S&T Miners head women's soccer coach, Coach Jane Grimley. How are you doing today?
How are you?
I'm doing good. Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to get started in coaching in college women's soccer?
Yeah, for sure. So I finished my playing career, kind of didn't know what was next for me. I got my degree and I was ready to go on into the world and do that 9 to 5 job and realized I can't sacrifice this part of my life. Like I wasn't ready for it to be done. So actually the last game of my senior year, I went up to the head coach right after the game and I said, can I join the staff? Can I just, be around and support? And from that point on, I just realized it's such a huge part of my life that I need to kind of keep with me to give me that enjoyment, competitive itch, and all of that. So I've just stuck with it since.
What was that like going to Golden Bacon's college to play soccer?
It was good. It's a smaller Division II school, so it's business focused. It's a very tight knit family environment. The soccer program was struggling initially when I joined the team, which was interesting to see the transition from really only winning like 2 games as a freshman to my senior year, where we really were a lot stronger and we went to playoffs and we did pretty well, all things considered. So it was nice to see that growth, especially coming from a really small school where it's so focused on one specific major. It's hard to necessarily find girls interested in business who were the right fit. So the fact that we were able to kind of turn the program around with new coaches and things like that was a really enjoyable experience. And I think positioned me well to go through that again as a coach in the future.
What was that experience like getting to put on that uniform and getting to represent the Golden Bacon College?
It was nice. I mean, I think whenever you get dressed in your kit, it becomes very real. And you think, okay, I played so much club soccer. My parents drove me all over the place and paid all this money. And we did all of that leading up to this point. And now it's kind of come to reality. And I think the important thing is too, like when you finish that high school or club soccer career, you're not done, right? Like you want to keep performing, you want to keep developing as a player. Like as much as college is the end goal, there's still more to be done. And I think putting on that uniform always kind of brings you back to that moment of like, oh, I've made it, but I'm still here to compete and do a job too.
What were some of your collegiate accomplishments?
So, like I said, freshman year was a struggle for us. So I think the only accomplishment I could say that I got was I was the top newcomer of the team. So that was, I think, a good transition point because my class was pretty strong. And then moving forward, the classes got better and better. Towards the end of my career, so by my senior year, I was recognized as CACC Player of the Week for a career brace. By the end of the season, I was nominated for all conference honors, and I also received the coaches award, which was basically just kind of like a leadership award. And generally, the awards I received were around more my personality and being someone who I think works really hard. Maybe wasn't always the most gifted when it comes to soccer, but would really give a good effort and try to, uplift the people around me too.
What was that experience like being a team captain for 2 seasons?
I think it's a good like transition kind of into coaching in a way. So I think it prepared me really well. I think it was nice to have a bit of influence at times because we did go through several coaching changes in my playing career. And the captains are kind of the players who then have to take on a lot of responsibility when there's no head coach, right? So you have to schedule practices and lifts and things like that. I think those sorts of like opportunities allowed me to grow, not just as a player, but as a person and step into that almost like a management role at times and ensure that the team was still progressing so that when the new coach did come, we could hit the ground running. So that was a great first step for me into coaching where you do that kind of the same thing all the time.
How was that transition like going from being a player to then joining the coaching staff of your alma mater and becoming an assistant coach?
Yeah, so it felt pretty natural just because it was a place that I had been for 4 years, and obviously I knew the players and the coach really well. I think the only thing that becomes tricky when you do that is you know everyone so well. So sometimes it's hard to then establish like, hey, our relationship may be a little bit different, especially for players that you're really close in age to. But I think there's a benefit to it too, where at that point, players were really honest with me and they were give me really good, true feedback that I could deliver to the head coach, which maybe was missing previously just because it wasn't as easy to kind of get their thoughts across. So I think in a way, it actually offers a lot of benefits. You just have to be sure to kind of draw the line at times if, it seems like we're too friendly when now there is a bit of a different relationship in place.
What was that experience like getting to coach your teammates who you previously played with?
I think it's like very fun and rewarding because you still get to see them grow, even though you've kind of finished and closed that chapter. Like the freshmen on the team were just starting. So I think it's like you become not only their coach, but like a huge fan of theirs because you can continue to support them through that growth. And I think that was some of the most rewarding moments was seeing some of those underclassmen, like, I don't know, score a great goal or do something that you knew that they were capable of. You just didn't get to see it when you were playing together.
As a coach, what was that feeling like seeing those players put on that same jersey that you put on a year ago?
So I think the only thing that might have changed is like we might have got a new kit. But everything otherwise is pretty much the same. Like you get into those same routines and you're like you remember those moments, and I think that's what's really special. And like even when you graduate, you get your jersey oftentimes and you keep it and you hang it up. So it's one of those things that always brings you like back to home and gives you that sense of what it was like when you were a player. And I think anyone who's even a coach now misses that feeling at times too, of like getting to step on the field and go through that whole process.
Of course, what was that process like leaving your alma mater to go into coaching and coaching on the youth side?
Yeah, so that was kind of an easier transition in ways because it's like a fresh start. So with youth players, they're so impressionable, they're so eager to learn, and they're in such usually raw stages where you feel like you can make a really big impact quickly just because, I've been playing for a lot of time and I had a lot of experience at that point with different coaches and different things that might help them. So for me, I think that was a really fun thing that maybe furthered my love of coaching because you really get to see your work kind of come to fruition a bit more with a young player who's just starting out as opposed to a college player who is often pretty developed and only needs like small coaching points hopefully, where youth players like you can kind of start from fresh and they're so eager and so keen to learn that it's very exciting.
Going to Sports Delaware, what was that experience like becoming a head coach for the first time?
It was not as difficult as I thought maybe it would be, just because they were very receptive, and I think that made it a lot easier. And the group that I had taken on was an age group that I was pretty familiar with, so it made it pretty easy, I think, because they were very, familiar, and they played 11v11 at that point. That was something that also made it easier. So there were a lot of things that I think made the transition happen pretty smoothly. And though it was different, maybe stepping into a head coach role, a lot of the responsibilities are the same. And I think my head coach always gave me a lot of opportunity and freedom. So it wasn't like a huge transition.
How was that transition like from going from being a college coach to then youth coach to then back on the college level as a head coach?
Yeah, so I feel like I've always done kind of a lot of things coincidingly, which is kind of nice. So you're just switching mindsets as opposed to like really having to go from one thing to the next. It's like a hard stop. So even when I was coaching youth, I was still involved somehow in college. And the same is here, where now I'm just volunteering with some local clubs and things like that. Because I think both complement each other. It's good to have that relationship at youth clubs, especially when you talk about things like recruiting. And it also just gives you more practice as a coach. Like if I only coach college, I'm only coaching 3 months out of the year in the fall, a couple games in the spring. That's not enough reps to like really get good at what you do. So I think coaching youth players gives you more opportunity to like try things, make mistakes, so that when you come to the college game, you don't have to do it there.
Coming to Missouri ST, what was that experience like becoming a head coach for the first time?
So I thought it'd be a lot easier than it would be, I think, to be honest. I was an assistant and an associate head coach eventually, and that was simple because it was somewhere I was so familiar with, and I really knew the niche. I knew the people, I knew the players that would be successful in our program, I knew the conference, and I thought maybe some of those things would transition a bit easier over. And I realized this is a very different place, which was a great learning experience for me. Like, it's a different area of the country. The recruiting process is a lot different. The conference was a lot different and more challenging, actually, than the conference I was in previously. So those things were things that I was kind of afraid of would be a bit harder than what we had previously experienced. But now, after a year in it, I think it's become way more familiar and easy to understand. It's just that time that it kind of can take initially when you're starting something completely new from scratch and everybody else already kind of has it figured out, and you have to learn very quick to kind of get on the same page.
What were some of the things that you learned as an assistant coach and associate head coach to then help you to make that jump to become a head coach?
Yeah, so I think one of my, I guess, biggest learnings or strengths, just going through coaching in general, and it's somewhat related to being a young coach, but I think it's also just like the mindset of it, is being like very open and giving players ownership of things and allowing them to have fun and be creative in a way. And that's the thing I think at my previous college and at the club level, like we would make funny TikToks, we would play cool games and things that like were still productive, and we'd have really intense and difficult practices as well. But it gives you that sense of like reward. And we gave the players the opportunity to have a lot of input in everything that we did and be really involved. And I think that sort of relationship and openness was super beneficial to be able to really have a strong relationship and allow the players to want to play for you and be really inspired and really buy in. And I think that was something here that we tried to implement as well, and kind of creating that culture that we were looking for. And it's not something that you can just do in a day. It definitely takes time and tweaking and going through the process, but it was a good initial practice going through it before we got here.
How's that feeling like when you got announced to become the next head coach and you got to run the program?
Super exciting, super scary, because it's far away. I had to move from the East Coast to the Midwest. So that was the first big like move in my life. And I don't know anyone here. I came here alone. My husband didn't even join me for the first couple months because he had commitments. So like, I drove out of here 16 hours and I'm like, all right, I'm here. Let me figure this all out. So that part was definitely intimidating, but exciting, because I knew that if I could figure this out, it would be a huge moment for me, like growth wise, and something that would really be powerful. But yeah, beyond that, it was very exciting. So something that we've been looking for. I was really hoping to find an opportunity, especially Division 2, and it's just hard. There's not a lot of great fits at times. So this one seemed to be like a perfect match.
As a coach, what was that transition like going from the East Coast to the Midwest?
Different. It's still very different. I'm like super, like I love the East Coast. I love the beach. I love the Northeast. I love the food. That's something I think I'll always miss because it's home, and I think there's a special like connection that people have with that. But even the soccer is a lot different. So here it's super dense in certain areas, St. Louis, Kansas City. The club scene is very, very different in how they operate and all of the levels. So starting to gain that knowledge and understand like where's good, what club teams are good, what's good to eat, like all of that was a fresh restart for me. But through time, it's definitely gotten a lot easier. I've made a lot of connections, and that's definitely helped give me some guidance.
After getting announced, what was that feeling like getting started and building your coaching staff around you?
Yeah, so I mean, the coaching staff part was pretty easy. My assistant coach is my husband, so he's kind of stuck with me by default. But at the same time, he's someone I can 100% trust, and he's experienced, older than me even, so he's got a couple more years in the game. So I knew that part would be very, very easy. My other staff are a lot of previous players who played on the team who had career-ending injuries or just were wanting to be involved with soccer, didn't feel like playing was supporting them, and they're our team managers. So we have four of them, and they do a ton for us as well with like keeping stats. They keep a ton of data. They help us with film review. They help us ordering food, like all the things that just takes so much time, and they are so good about it and do it with so much like spunk and enthusiasm. I'm like, all right, this is great. So they have made everything easier, all of them together, which is really important when you build a program, because you've got a lot of players that need help, need attention, and one head coach is not enough to give to best serve them.
Of course, how has that experience been like? Obviously, as you said, your assistant coach is your husband. So, what has that experience been like getting to coach alongside your husband?
It's mixed. It's good most days. We do find ourselves talking about soccer maybe a bit too much, just like off the field, outside of the office, but it's what we're both the most passionate about. So for me, I think it's a real like asset to have his support both on the field and off the field, and also a level of understanding and investment in each other's careers, which I don't think always happens. And for me, I don't know if I could manage to marry someone if they didn't get where I was coming from. So as much as we probably hate how much we talk about soccer, it's also like a key pillar and staple in our relationship too.
Of course, as a head coach, what has that been like getting to hire alumni and help build the program on the coaching side, just like how you were a coach at your alumni?
Yeah, no, for sure. We used to have, so we've had some conversations with players about jumping on staff when they finish out. I guess the hard thing is like we've only really had one full graduating class since we've only been in Missouri for about a year. So it's hard to kind of keep those players around because it's only been a short period of time. We do have a player this upcoming season who's jumping into like a player coach role. It's one of our goalkeepers, and she's really, really talented, but we're thinking about building up some of our younger players. So when she departs, they're a bit more prepared. And she's taken that role on with grace and is becoming more of like a coach leader to them as opposed to being like the default player. So that's been great to see. And it's just fun to see as we kind of grow with the program, how the players grow and how our like relationships grow. And after a year, it's like not enough time to really truly know them. And I feel like every day we're like just finding out new things and developing like deeper connections. Like now I feel like I know about their families. I know about, home situations, sometimes too much, like boyfriends and stuff. Girlfriends, I don't know. It just depends, but it's nice to have that level of like openness and like relationship beyond soccer, because I think it's really important to like know them as people and be able to support them through everything, not just as their coach.
As a head coach, what was that feeling like the first time you got to step onto the field and lead the team?
I think it's the same as earlier, nerve-wracking. Good, but nerve-wracking. Like you just hope you've done everything that you can to prepare. Like I'm a super planner. I almost planned, I think, too much at some points because I wanted everything to be in line. I wanted them to have the information. I wanted to be super prepared. But you just can't prepare for everything. And I think that was a huge learning for me that like sometimes you just have to like adjust because things are just not going to go the way that you maybe hoped. And I think that was my biggest maybe takeaway in my first year is as much as you want to have everything lined up and like make a plan so you can't fail, things are going to go wrong and you just got to adapt and figure it out.
What does a typical game day look like for you as a head coach versus for your players?
Yeah, so I think my day is probably a bit easier. We just have to kind of show up, get everything set up in the classroom, put the starting lineup on the board, sort of those things. They go through a whole routine, like getting taped, going into the locker room. They're in there for a long time, getting pumped up, talking to each other. Some of them have to help set up the field. We get out there and then they've got to do a warm up and play 90 minutes. So I think their day is a bit more stressful. We just kind of have to be there, I think, as, a tool, give them guidance, hope that they have the information and that we prepared them well enough, because once they kind of step on the field, we lose a lot of the control. We're just there to kind of, hopefully solve problems and give insight, but they kind of have most of the influence in how it's going to go.
Of course, who are some of the teams that you face each week in your conference?
Yeah, so I think the most local would probably be Drury University, who are down in Springfield, Southwest Baptist. We have a bunch in St. Louis that are pretty close by, which would be like UMSL, Maryville, McKendree's not too far from there. So we're pretty much in, I would say, generally like 2 hours from Rolla because we're centrally located. And the farthest we'll go is like Kansas City. There's two teams out there, and there's also a team in Upper Iowa, Indianapolis. So those would be a bit further trips, but they're not as frequent because they're with one single school, where the others are kind of in pockets around those cities. So travel's a bit more here in the Midwest. I found like it's more normal to just drive for longer distances. We're in the Northeast, like you don't do that. There's too much traffic. But it's like easy drives. They're long drives. They're just boring and straight and long.
Of course, what does that home game atmosphere look like when teams like McKendree comes versus going to McKendree and playing them?
We try to make it like, I want to say exciting, maybe a bit hostile, but like not in a horrible way, just in like you want it to be competitive, right? And I want the fans to feel like they can express themselves and have that like fun experience. We do have a couple of groups on campus that try to make games engaging like that. We have a group called Culture, which is headed up by like our football team. We've got a group called the Hooligans, which is like a mix of students and like sororities, fraternities that come out and just like try to, cause like ruckus. So there are some good like student organizations, and they're really trying to build up the support of women's sports in general, just because it's not always the first thing that people want to watch. Like our football games are probably the top choice, but it's good that other students are kind of getting involved, and it just adds an option for them of something to do during the day where they feel like they can go have fun.
Can you talk about, of course, the culture that you've built for the women's soccer program?
Yeah, sure. So our core values, I think, are a good place to start. So one of our core values is empowerment. So we want to make sure people feel they can come and be themselves, and that we're also pushing each other, but not to a point where it's like destructive, right? We want to be open and honest. We want to hold each other accountable, but we also want to ensure that people are feeling like they are in a good space where they can be themselves and continue to grow, and that they have support. So that's one. Ownership is another. So kind of like accountability, but we've tried to get away from that word because it seems like there's such like a negative around accountability sometimes. Like they think that they're going to get punished almost in a way, but we want them to take ownership both like of things like mistakes, but also like feel like they can take the initiative to make decisions, or to start the warm up, just those little things. And our last one is competition. I wrote them down because I knew I'd forget it. And with that, we try to keep everything kind of data focused and competition based. So even scrimmages in practice, they're getting tracked, like their score is getting tracked, who scored, pass completion, chances created. And this is a running list that we keep throughout the season where they get points. So instead of just feeling like you play against the same, I don't know, 8, 10, 11 players every day, which does get kind of boring because it's like, what am I playing for? We try to keep it, competitive and keep them interested. And I think they do feel a little bit of pressure sometimes for it, which I think could be good because it just makes it more realistic as opposed to just feeling like a normal practice.
What does that recruitment process look like for those prospective student athletes looking to play collegiate soccer?
Yeah, so we get tons of kids who email, and we usually kind of go back and forth, see what that kind of looks like. It's a very interesting school because it's very science heavy. So like engineering, biology, math, STEM-based sort of majors, and there's some others as well, but that's generally the interest that we get. And with that, it's interesting to find the right fit because it's somewhere where I think you can do a really hard major, but you're still very serious about sports too. And that can be a hard balance to find because I know it's not possible everywhere. Some schools you have to sacrifice a bit of soccer to do a harder major and vice versa. So I think it's a lot about finding that right fit who feels like they can balance something that's a bit more challenging, maybe academically, but still isn't going to just put soccer on the back burner when that happens, and they want a student athlete experience, not exclusively athlete or exclusively student.
As a head coach, what are some of the things that you look at in those prospective student athletes when going out on the road recruiting them?
Yeah, so I think fit for the program is important. So that could be, kind of their personality, their leadership, body language, just small, not small, intangible things. And then performance, obviously we play an interesting shape. We have some pretty specific tactical things that we look for. So finding players that fit that, but also offer something maybe a bit different. So, we have a lot of kids from the team right now. Let's say they're from Missouri, they're engineering majors, they're midfielders. Like we can't have too many of those. We want more diversity. We feel like we have different sorts of skill sets and interests, and just even from different parts of the country, we're going to have the best combined result. So I think it's finding what makes everyone a bit unique too, and how they can add value to the program.
Of course, what does that official visit look like for those prospective student athletes coming to Misssouri S&T?
Yeah, so usually our admissions handles the tour because they do an awesome job, like to the point where they have to hit on like 5 facts at every building. And I'm like, I can't remember all that. Like they're trained professionals, they do that part. And then once that's done, we usually have a practice or a team activity where the player can either observe or jump in, depending on, what their kind of level of interest is and if they can. And that's a good opportunity, I think, to meet the team. And I think that's a huge part of the experience is like, you want to know this is somewhere where you feel like people are like you or you could fit in, and then it seems like an environment that you'd be happy to play soccer. So I think meeting the team is important. And then after that, we usually like sit down with the player, tour our athletics facilities, maybe eat something if time permits, and then we'll hand them over to our freshmen. Usually do our official visits, and they have the kids overnight, and they have them in the dorm. And they've done a really good job. That group specifically has been a lot of fun, and they just pass the responsibility around. They're always hanging out, and I don't even know what they do. Sometimes they play board games, sometimes they watch movies. They keep each other busy. So that part is kind of hands off for me, but they do a really good job, and everyone seems to have a really fun time.
What is that like, obviously, as a head coach, getting to show them the facility and show the soccer field that they're going to be playing the next 4 to 5 years at?
Yeah, I love it here. Like the facilities for me are a real like positive in a lot of ways. Obviously, there's always things that can be better, and facilities are always improving. Like we look at some of our other teams in the conference now who are getting like soccer only fields, like oh, that is super. And I think at some point, like we'll probably get to that. But here we do have a turf field and we have a grass field, and we also have a small indoor turf field too. So for me, like that's pretty good. Like not everywhere has those options for facilities. And our athletics facilities are pretty new. We have a really nice weight room and a strength and conditioning coach, like all of the things that I think are necessary. And obviously, there's always like the little bells and whistles which make things better. But for me, I have a lot of like pride, and I think there's enough opportunity and space here where soccer is it's still important. Obviously, when you compete with football, it's difficult because you're not usually the top sport, but there's still enough of a focus on it here, which makes it really nice.
As a head coach, what is that like seeing those freshmen put on that Missouri ST green jersey for the first time?
It's exciting. I think it's exciting for them and for us just because you're like, you hope that everything that you've kind of expected or hoped for them is now going to come to fruition. And that's the hardest thing when you recruit. Like you see kids in way different environments to the college environment. Like sometimes it's clubs, sometimes it's high school, sometimes it's ID clinic, and you don't really know what that's going to look like in the moment until they get there. So I think that's the point that you're like, well, I hope this goes as as I expect it to go. And I think most of the times people don't disappoint, but it's exciting. It's maybe a bit like, I don't know, nerve-wracking in a way, but it's a good moment for everybody.
As a head coach, what is it like seeing those freshmen put it on for the first time versus seeing those seniors putting it on for the last time?
I think the seniors one is a lot harder. Just because a lot of them like and I went through that, right? Like you played this your whole life and it feels like it comes to such a fast end where you're like, how did I even get here? And I think even for a lot of college athletes, like they're not done progressing. I think if they had more time or they entered college later or they did a redshirt year, all those examples, they could still continue to improve because you're graduating at like 21, 22. Like professional players don't always hit their best until like 25. So there's still like a lot of opportunity if they want to keep playing. So I guess that's the hard thing is like when they do step into that last day of the uniform, are they completely done? Is this just like a chapter closed? Are they going to keep involved? Because then the pressures of real life come to like getting a job and doing all of those other things. So it's a sad moment, but it can be like a good one too, like appreciation and closure in a way as well.
What is that like, obviously, as a head coach, to see them go on from being collegiate athletes to then getting into the corporate world and going into their field of study?
I think here it's like super special because I like being at a STEM school. I like that a lot of our players do male dominated like fields like computer science or different branches of engineering. And we always talk about how like we want to raise like women who are like I don't want to I feel like I can't curse on camera, but like tough and like ready to go and like really going into this field and like they just don't care. Like they're just gonna go and own it. So for me, it's fun to see all the places they go, and they go like to all these different like cool states and doing these jobs that are like so beyond my understanding and knowledge. Like I have a kid working this summer at like a nuclear power plant and is getting like background check for all that. I'm like, this is crazy. Like I don't even know what that means. So for me, it's very like it's super interesting and rewarding to see what they go and do.
As a coach, what is it like seeing some of those players go into college coaching like you have?
I think that's like when things really like become full circle and you feel like you could have helped someone to find a career path similar to yourself. Because I love coaching. I think this is like something that more women need to be involved in to continue to, empower girls and help coach them and give them the resources to continue to develop. So when those sorts of things happens, I think it's like you feel like you've kind of completed the circle in a way. And it's really fun for me to see what they could potentially go on and do and hopefully surpass like whatever sort of experience I've had. I would love for them to like go and kill it even more.
As a head coach, what is that like, obviously seeing them go on to the professional level and play in the NWSL?
Oh, I haven't had a player go to that level yet, but if I do, I think I'll just quit. I'm like, this is it. This is as good as it gets for me. I think we've had players go into like semi-professional levels or go overseas and play professionally. That's a really kind of common option because there's a lot of countries where that's a little bit easier. Like there's more money in it and it's maybe a little bit less developed or more developed. But we've had some really good players at the club level who love soccer, like, and are super, they're on like kind of that right track. They're going to big schools and that could potentially happen for them in the future. So I'll be the biggest fan if at some point in my life I get to see that happen.
Of course, what are some of your future plans for the program moving forward?
Yeah, so I think our biggest goal for next season is just to have a better year. So first year, I think, is a hard time, right? It's transition. We didn't have a ton of time to bring in players and recruit. It was a lot of just, I don't know, figuring it out, really going through that whole process and starting to learn. And now I feel like we have a much better foundation. So for me, the fall is just bringing in a really big, strong class, kind of a fresh start, and continuing to work through all of the topics, challenges, everything we've kind of accomplished in the past year, which has really set a good foundation to now really push it forward and hopefully be able to get the results that I think we have worked really hard for.
What advice would you give those high school athletes looking to become collegiate women's soccer players?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is for them to really be proactive in the process. So even if they feel like they're at the point of like they're doing too much, they're annoying the coach, like you're not. Like there are so many kids out there who are going through that same process and it's really hard, it's really competitive. So the more that you as a player can do to separate yourself, whether it's sending emails, creating a soccer Instagram, like all of those little things can really differentiate you and help you to get the attention that you're looking for because there is a college out there for everyone.
What advice would you give those first year collegiate athletes looking that are entering their first season of collegiate soccer?
Prepare. Do your best to prepare. Like this summer, work really hard. Come in fit. If you're not fit, that's already going to set you behind. Play competitive soccer over the summer. Like play with college athletes. Do all of the things that are going to help that transition. Because I think that's the hardest part. Is like you go from, I don't know, playing soccer a couple times a week, maybe during high school every day. So now like it's a whole part of your day. Your schedule is different and it's built in, and it's at times maybe your bigger focus than at school. So making that transition a bit easier and being as ready for that to happen as possible, I think gives you the best opportunity to really make an impact.
What advice would you give those seniors that are looking to go into playing professionally, whether it's overseas or the NWSL?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of like opportunity and resources, way more in recent years than there has been in the past. I think the opportunity to go overseas is generally a little bit easier just because there's so many more places that you can go and ways that that can kind of look like you can continue to getting education, you could volunteer as a coach and you could play. And there's a lot of different combinations with that. Obviously, the NWSL is a bit more specific in what they're looking for, and it's sometimes a higher level than when you can go overseas. So I think there's a ton of options. It's really just looking into what makes sense and is the best fit. But definitely, if someone is looking to go overseas, there's lots of companies and resources out there that are very, very helpful. And not that you have to go ahead and pay for anything or pay for an agent, but just do a handful of kind of homework and research and see what you can come up with and go from there.
Of course, for those collegiate athletes looking to get into college coaching, what would you give them coming out of college?
Yeah, I think definitely staying involved in a college program is the biggest thing. So whether that's your alma mater or if you're moving somewhere else, somewhere local, and ask to just be on staff as a volunteer if there's not a paid opportunity. And I think getting your foot in the door is the biggest thing. Once you're in the college game, it's a lot easier to transition from school to school or role to role. But that first step is really important. I think when you first get out of college, it's kind of the easiest because you're fresh, you're new, you've got a lot of energy, people don't have really any expectation, they just kind of need the support and the extra hands. So do whatever you can at that point to get involved and just go from there.
What advice would you give those people that are looking to coach at their alma mater like you have?
I think that's the easiest way to go, just because you already know everybody. You have the connections, you have the players, you have the coach. Just ask. I think that's the biggest thing. Sometimes opportunities aren't going to be obvious or they won't come to you, or there's not going to be like a job posting online. And I think that's a lot of college coaching is you may have to reach out to the coaches and just say, hey, what can I do? How can I be involved? And sometimes it's like I don't know, we need you a couple days a week. Cool. Like whatever that sort of opportunity may be, something as a good, as a start is just the easiest way, and then figure out what you're really looking for from there.
What advice would you give those head coaches that are looking to build their own program and build their own legacy?
Yeah, I think I'm still figuring that out. If anyone has advice for me, I would be completely all open. I guess the biggest thing I've kind of taken away is it is like you're building a program, right? It's like Rome wasn't built in a day. It's not going to happen overnight. It takes it takes like gardening. Like you got to water the plants. Like it's going to take a long time to kind of see that finally come into bloom. And at times it's lonely, it's frustrating. Like you feel like the results aren't reflecting the effort that everyone is putting in. But I think that's just like that's like a day you're watering then. Like you're not where you need to be fully then. So patience for me has been something I really have to learn. I'm just not really a patient person. But that all of the efforts they're not going in vain. It's just they're baby steps.
That's great advice. Where can my listeners find you at on social media along with the program at?
Yeah, so I think the easiest place to find me on social media is probably Instagram or TikTok. TikTok, I'm probably the most active, and my handle is at J Grimley Soccer. And then for the program, Instagram, Twitter, there's a little bit of Facebook, and that would be Miners Women's Soccer, or Miners WSOC.
Thank you again, Coach Jenna Grimley, for your interview, and best of luck in your future with the Missouri S&T Miners as the head women's soccer coach.
Thank you.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Coach Jane Grimley, for your interview, and best of luck in your future.
Thanks.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.